Let me start by first talking about the context. I want to start with a very brief story from Gautam Buddha. I'm going to talk about before he attained enlightenment, and he was called Siddhartha. He was a prince, and he was sitting in his garden and saw a bird being hit by an arrow. And he immediately went and picked the bird, nursed it, took out the arrow, and gave medicines and something. Within a few minutes, a cousin, another prince, came and said, "Oh, what are you doing with my bird?" "I just hunted the bird." And Siddhartha said, "Oh, how is this your bird?" "I have nursed it. I took out the arrow. And hopefully this will give the bird her life again." And both of them kept fighting. Whose bird was it? The story that is it about the conquest or is it about nurturing? I think that fundamental conflict that we see continues even today. I'm sure all of you have read at least Thomas Piketty's conclusions in his new book. And he comes up with this startling, and I would say devastating analysis, and nobody is challenging it. No serious academic is challenging it. He says that all the big gains of the 20th century in terms of creating a more equal society have been reversed. And in 2015, the level of inequality is as much as it was in 1900. You see all around a very, very strong narrative of anger, a narrative of unrest. And still, when we look at how the global leadership is responding, it's putting back those $3 trillion in the same capitalist system. It goes back to the same kind of MDGs where there's been a huge resistance to even bringing inequality as a separate goal in the post-2015 agenda. 4 or 5 key roles. The first is, just look at, I think, the Arab Spring. My feeling is that it happened in spite and despite the civil society. We were not able to understand what was happening. I think that we were, as the organized civil society, extremely behind the curve. We just could not understand, could not feel the pulse of the people, could not understand the anger that was being built. So I think the first role should have been to be able to connect with people. And I think that's really the fundamental role of a global citizenship movement, or to my understanding, a development education work, to connect with that anger and also channelize that anger. Somewhere we have swung the pendulum too much towards advocacy. There are more resources in advocacy, and probably that's the easier task. We don't get into the question of development education. So I think that's one, I would say. It is, in terms of the role, bringing back the pendulum. I'm not creating an either-or situation, but I'm saying that advocacy cannot be the central role. But now we're increasingly now being faced with this challenge that within our own organizations, there's a unit which is called the fundraising unit, and which comes and says, "Oh, you're making your story extremely complex." This constant conflict that the story needs to be simplified and presented in a fashion where people can almost immediately connect, but unfortunately connect to a sense of charity and not a sense of solidarity. And finally, in terms of the role, I would just say that this understanding that what's happening at the local level has a tremendous impact on the global, and what happens at the global level has again an impact at the local level. And I think, just to say something more radical, it's time that we forget about national boundaries. The global capital has completely forgotten about the national boundaries, but when it comes to labor, the national boundaries are as intact. And now finally let me move to three critical roles that I see for any development education work, development community. And the first is to essentially talk about power building. The power that we, the people, had given to the state, to public institutions, has been completely sucked by crony capitalism, by few power elites, and people have felt only disempowered. The second, I think, is to not only reclaim but reestablish the centrality of the idea of justice. How do we change this discourse if we talk of justice from a GDP-focused approach to an alternative approach? You know, maybe what Bhutan does, the happiness index, is a way of looking at an alternative paradigm. The British Prime Minister over the last 1 year has been saying that we believe in talking about golden threads for the post-2015 agenda. And golden threads are good governance. But we've been challenging the British Prime Minister and this entire discourse that until and unless you start understanding the poison threads of the global development, and when you say good governance on one hand as the golden thread, you need to juxtapose it with the unfair trade laws, with the illicit financial flows, with tax evasion, with corruption, with impunity. Too many of us for too long have remained neutral. And also, to borrow the Henrik Boll Foundation's tagline, they say there's only one way to be, and that is to meddle. We've lost our dreams, and we need to bring back those dreams.
Is it necessary to go to local activists, people with a local passion for justice, and connect them with some global great movement or whatever, or are we just exploiting them for our NGO needs and to fulfill our results-based framework?
I would partially agree with you if we are doing it in an extractive fashion for the project deliverables that we have.
The difficulty is that because NGOs, civil society, has become quite institutionalized, we've lost trust with some of these movements. And I want to just get, I suppose, a sense from you how to rebuild that trust.
I see more and more international NGOs become extremely corporate in their ways of functioning. So you are also creating structures which need much greater resources. And your reliance on local indigenous resources has declined. Trust will happen only when you walk out and walk shoulder to shoulder when there are critical questions of justice or injustice.
I suspect I'm not unique in this room that regularly on a Saturday morning as I do my shopping in the supermarket, I'm confronted by students, enthusiastic students, rattling boxes, saying we are going on a trip to India or to Africa, and encounter exactly the kind of contradictions we're talking about. And they talk about making a difference in terms of, I have been there. I mean, some of them, they don't know anything.
At times, in such conversations, when I talked of charity and solidarity, it's in no way to demean the young person who's there with passion and hopes to make a difference. I was not trying to do that. In fact, it would really be going the wrong path if we do that. I think that's where I think the development education conversation comes in. How do you have a conversation with them where I'm sure they want to understand, but they've not had those opportunities for that conversation, that what solidarity means and what charity means. Thank you.